Welcome, listeners. You are listening to Voices Unbound. We are your hosts, Quinn
and McCuna.
And in today's episode, we're diving into the overarching impact of history, specifically the ways in which mass incarceration, immigration, family separation, generational trauma, and colorism continue to shape the lives of African Americans and African diasporic communities today. Homegoing by Gyasi follows the descendants of two half-sisters, Afia and Essie, who are born in 18th century Ghana. Gyasi traces both sisters' descendants out 7 generations. It's a story of what was lost and what is still being fought for. From the chains of slavery like Essie to the cells of those convicted like H. Motifs of African and African American history are linked. We'll speak with experts who will help us guide through this complex, painful history. Well, son, I'll tell you, life for me ain't been no crystal stair. It had tacks in it, and splinters, and boards torn up, and places with no carpet on the floor. Bare.
The prison industrial complex serves as a modern-day tool of racial control that have disproportionately targeted Black communities for decades. Let's hear from Dr. Hiraldo to explore how history has shaped the systems we live in today.
Well, there is an idea of, like I said before, of a justification that it's not strategically is not put together with specific conditions. It's like African Americans, for instance, they're going to continue the legacy, and that legacy was based upon an idea of seeing them as naturally and biologically predetermined to be lower, to be lesser, to be less successful, to be, less intelligent and less capable. So in a way, it's a continuation of that, of slavery, of exploitation, of justification of that. And so it's like the idea that they are specific, they deserve to be there because of the way who they are instead of because of the system.
Mass incarceration isn't just a contemporary problem. While the system may have evolved, the underlying motivations and consequences remain deeply connected to that original trauma of slavery. And just like Kojo and H in Homegoing, families were torn apart by such forces beyond their control as the Fugitive Slave Act or the convict leasing system. The process of separation in the criminal justice system doesn't just stop with an arrest. To understand the full impact of family separation, we need to look at how these issues have evolved and how they continue to affect African American families. Joining us to discuss this is Dr. Copeland, a history professor at FAMU.
I would say in a way, we still have that disattachment problem where we'll separate before actually coming together. So when we look at the separation of young children, it leads to the trauma, kids lashing out, acting out, stereotypes being placed on African Americans, especially kids working in the school system. If it's a predominantly Black school, it automatically kind of gets a bad rep as not having the best education and everything of that nature.
As we've seen the separation of Black families, whether through their criminal justice system, historical violence, or government policies, isn't just a momentary tragedy. It is a profound disruption that echoes through the lives of parents, children, and communities. This is where the true depth of family separation reveals itself. It is not just a matter of individuals torn apart, it's the lasting scars that perpetuate the cycle of pain. The separation is not just physical, it becomes psychological, emotional. It becomes a wound passed down through generations.
The mother smiled to know her child was in a sacred place, but that smile was the last smile to come upon her face. When Black families were torn apart through slavery or recently through incarceration, the trauma does not disappear. It becomes part of a cultural inheritance. Similar to Sani's chapter in Homegoing, the trauma often manifests as anxiety and depression, catalysts to a broken family structure.
Probably most common one. I think all of us probably been through it, but the first weapons we have, the traumatic part of it. But that was disciplines that was used highly during immigrants from Africa over the ships, also onto the plantation.
African immigrants travel with a history shaped by colonialism, the legacy of the transatlantic slave trade, and the scars of their own nation's trauma, leaving them to navigate the complexities of identity in a racially divided society.
Mentioning the area of epigenetics, from a medical perspective, when we were talking about conditions, we were saying the lack of provision of basic needs, controlling space, religion, the flaws, because again, religion, the church in particular was a way of survival, but some people say that in another way it hinders.
It is imperative to illustrate how, regardless of the country we migrate to, our kind are perpetually antagonized. Conspicuously, Abena is ruthlessly murdered in the name of Christianity. The streets of Harlem are unfazed by Sonny's work, and Marjorie gets singled out for not being African American enough. This system we could never truly escape, whether we see it in our states, cities, or worst of all, our own communities.
How did colorism emerge within the context of slavery and colonialism, and what historical events influences interracial hierarchy in African American communities? I believe that the earliest forms of colorism can be traced back to the house slaves and the field slaves. Obviously, the house slaves, they were lighter skin tone, and the masters favored them for this, and therefore they would be kept inside doing house chores, whereas the darker colored slaves, they would be exposed to the field work because, of course, they were thought of less as than the lighter colored slave, even though they were both black.
Growing up as a lighter skinned person, of course I hear jokes of being a house slave, and it's just like, why are we still holding on to this, you know what I'm saying?
It's important to realize that historically, that form of elitism, it never has really left. It always has mutated.
Colorism has not been toned down from the past. I think it's just taken different forms in a way that makes people feel like it's normalized.
But it was always present. So he won't date another black woman because he doesn't see her as attractive as a light-skinned woman.
I also agree with the fact that a lot of black men with types for more lighter-skinned women versus darker-skinned women, to the point has evolved into many black men going after or favoring many women with Eurocentric features.
In essence, history isn't a closed chapter, it's a continuum. Like Homegoing, the narrative we know as history is an overarching story with each chapter, an era of human civilization. The struggles for racial justice, reparations, equal rights, and cultural recognition today are rooted in past experiences, whether it's slavery, colonialism, or the fight for civil rights.
The system never left, exactly as history cannot end or permanently subside in one time frame. That system didn't hold our ancestors down, so why should it hold us? We encourage you to reflect on the narratives we shared today and think about how history's wounds still affect us all. Be sure to subscribe, share this podcast with others, and follow us for future episodes. Until next time, keep challenging the narratives that have been written for us, and remember, our voices are unbound.
I wish I was fed forgiveness, yeah.